Hey.
If we want to go that way.
Which way?
Your way.
Oh yeah, keep going.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, my lovers, welcome back to the channel. This is my bike build. Today, I wanted to talk a little more about riding with Uncle Dan. I went on a ride with Uncle Dan. We went to St. Edward's State Park. That's a little bit up north from us. Ended up going about 35 miles that day, and I took my Poseidon Triton. I've had that for about 5 months, almost 6 months. And so I've been getting more and more used to it. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that versus his Breezer, his 90s Breezer, because when I started doing rides with him, I was going on my gravel bike, my Fezzari gravel bike. And then over time I started to realize that even though you can do a significant amount of road riding with a gravel bike, my bike is, or my Fezzari is sort of skewed to the mountain bikey side of gravel. Whereas I'd still call it, a road style bike, but it's very rugged. The frame is a little bit overbuilt as it's rated for the impact that a XC mountain bike can handle. So you could probably put a suspension on this one and ride a decent amount of trails now. I wouldn't turn it fully into a mountain bike, but it's really skewed to that mountain bike side. So for people who ask me and talk about the Fezzari, if you've ever seen videos about it, I've said this before, I would not substitute this for a road bike. Like if you wanted a bike that you could take on gravel and road, I would actually honestly recommend the Poseidon Triton more than I would recommend the Fezzari Shafer, even though the Fezzari Shafer is super comfortable, super rugged. It's kind of niche. I think it would be more for long distance gravel. It'd be really comfortable over a rough surface over a long period of time. But if you're doing pavement riding, it's kind of overkill. And so I, especially for the type of gravel riding that I do in the city, if I do gravel, it's going to be 80% road just to get to the 20% gravel. So even though I do like the 50 millimeter tire clearance, and the Poseidon Triton is about a 38 millimeter tire clearance, 40 in the front, 37 in the back. You could probably squeeze a 38 on the back, and if you wanted to match tires, I wouldn't recommend it for something super duper chunky. For the things that I ride, it's perfectly adequate. The reason why I tend to lean on the all-road or gravel category in cycling is that for me, I really do like the wider tires. I associate it growing up riding mountain bikes and BMX bikes with, I don't know what the tire width was when I was a kid, but I definitely remember them being, juicier tires. And especially when you look at little kids riding, it's you're going to start a kid off on wider tires until they get used to cycling. And then the skinny tire era that I started riding my big boy bikes in, or my kind of serious riding in, not that I'm a serious rider, but stuff that you can commute on, they were skinny tires. I was getting like 25 millimeters, 23 millimeter tires, in some cases 19 millimeter tires. While I didn't grow up in a serious biking culture, I kind of can get used to anything. But the more I kind of felt my own preference out of it, I was like, I would rather have juicier tires. And so the thing that I really connected with was my touring bike. My touring bike, little did I know at the time it could fit up to 38 millimeters, but I started riding on 32s and I never went back. I never wanted anything skinnier than that. I was like, this is fine. I didn't feel like I was losing any speed. That was the myth back then, that lower pressures on wider tires was slower, but I did not notice any of that. I'd rock them at about 80 PSI when my other road bikes were like in the hundreds, 120. And it was weird at first, but at some point, numbers are just numbers, and then the actual feel you get on a bike is another thing. And so I just got used to riding it at the 80 PSI, and I thought this was a lot better for me. I like the wider tires. I like the more upright position. And I think in modern times, the marketing for touring bikes is not as strong as maybe as it was when I first started riding. Serious bikes. And so when I tried to find another touring bike per se, there just wasn't that many options that were like, this is specifically a touring bike. And so the crossover was like gravel bikes. You could get pretty much all the similar things you were getting on an air quote touring bike, but they were just called gravel bikes now. The wider tire clearance, the ability to get racked up on your bike. Now, it just depends. Gravel bike, it's just a name for a category. You can get something that's super more for racing or more for just touring around and having fun. And I think I lean on the more having fun. So this Poseidon Triton is kind of like in between there. It's what's considered an all-road bike, which is like maybe halfway gravel. If you're gravel curious, that's kind of the way you want to go. But I think an all-road bike, if you were like me and you're not a competitive cyclist and you still want to keep up with the roadies, that's probably the best of both worlds, and if you wanted to kind of be in between genres, so to speak. And so the main difference between my bike and Uncle Dan's bike is, one of the obvious ones being an old school versus new school, is the rim brakes. Rim brakes do have their advantages, but they also have their disadvantages. I'd say the advantages of rim brakes is it's a lighter system. So you're on a lighter bike, which is ultimately better for climbing in a lot of cases. If you're going on a lot of uphills, they are better because they're just overall a lighter system. And so the overall weight of your bike is usually less than a rim brake bike that's in a similar category. But the downside is when there's a lot of uphill, there's also a lot of downhill. And just based on riding with Dan consistently, I'd say with the Triton, I can keep up with him better going uphill. It's a better climber than the Fazari Schaefer that I have, but it just destroys him on the downhills. The rim brakes and the kind of more slack geometry, less, it kind of just feels more, you're not right up on the handlebars gonna keel over. That with the wider tire clearance, so that's another advantage of disc brakes, I feel, to me, is that the frames will generally allow for wider tire clearances. Even now, modern road bikes that are disc brakes, you're gonna have up to 32 and in some cases 40 millimeter tires, just for the people who wanna be a little bit more casual and aren't trying to like shave every gram off their bike that they want. So the tire clearance, I believe, like for Dan, it's probably between 25 and 28 millimeters, whereas I have a max tire clearance of 40 on the front, 37 millimeters on the back, so I could probably round it off to 38 front and back if I wanted to have matching. And so that is going to give me better descending. And then one thing that's not specific, because you can change your drivetrain, but I have a more modern drivetrain because I bought it in modern times. So I have a 2x10, 20 speed bike with 2 chain rings, and he has a 2x8. Now my cassette on the back is bigger than his. He has an 11 to 25. I have an 11 to 38. So in terms of climbing, it's going to be easier to climb on my bike. Now, one of the things that's not particular to Era is steel versus aluminum. They still make plenty of steel bikes, still make plenty of aluminum bikes. I really feel like modern bikes now, the steel is probably something that I would go with. Aluminum works too, especially if you're riding wider tires, and I don't think it matters as much if you have aluminum frame, but the wider tires will definitely play into effect, especially if you go with tubeless, then it alleviates the stiffness of aluminum. And like I said, Dan's bike is faster on the straights and up hills, but I have a wider gear range and I also have more gears. Now, I would always pick a wider gear range over more gears personally, but it is what it is. I have the best of both worlds because I have a wider range and more. Now, a lot of 90s bikes, road bikes, can fit 10-speed cassettes. So if he wanted to update his drivetrain to a similar one to mine, he probably could, and he probably would not have any problems. I mean, even if an 8-speed, you could get a wider, 8 or 9-speed, you could still get a wider range. Now, does it matter, the modern versus the old school? It does in some ways, and it doesn't in other ways. Now, I weigh more than Dan. Like, I float, if I stop exercising, I can easily balloon up to 245 pounds, which I've been at, maybe a year and a bit ago. So I would say this increase in braking power is probably a lot more beneficial for me than it is for him because he's lighter than I am. I'm just assuming he's definitely, his build is slighter and we're probably similar heights. And And also another thing, because of where we live, there's going to be more adverse weather conditions. There's going to be more rain, more wet leaves, more things like that. So the wider tires and the disc brake combination is always going to be more welcome than the rim brakes. Now, I love simplicity in bikes, so I'm always going to have a place in my heart for rim brake bikes. But if you can afford to get a disc brake bike that's well set up, then it'd probably be my preference. You know, the factor that you're making when you're deciding whether you want to go with a new bike or a used bike is the pricing too, right? A 90s bike is clearly going to be cheaper to get into right off the bat if you're getting it used. Obviously, if it's from the 90s, you're going to be trying to find it used or find a frame that you can build up. And so, you know, you're looking to 200 to 600 to start versus the Poseidon Triton that retails at $999. Keep in mind, I have not made any upgrades to this bike. It's just stock. And so everything you see me riding with him, I have not made any upgrades. I haven't changed the tire or the drivetrain or anything like that. So like most things in life, right, this comes down to your preference and your use case. Because I like to have the option of going off-road, the Poseidon Triton offers me that. I can put on 38mm tires, and I have that ability to turn it into a kind of a light gravel bike, which gives it more versatility. But in terms of raw speed, if you're really just trying to stay on the bike path or do road riding, then I would say it's not really necessary to get a modern bike. I don't think many of the modern advancements make that much of a difference when you're doing road riding. I would argue personally for myself, if you weigh more like me, I tend to weigh more than the average rider. The disc brakes, they're an improvement and they give you just more confidence. I used to be terrified going downhill, and now I'm not. And then now that I see it in comparison riding regularly with Dan and seeing how when I go downhill, we both know it's like, he's like, go ahead, man, I'll meet you down there, because I can just go at insane speeds. I've reached speeds up to 37 miles an hour. Again, keeping in mind, I'm not a competitive rider. I'm just using my body weight and using the gradient to travel downhill. Those are speeds that I would never felt comfortable at before. Like, I felt like at about 30 miles an hour on my touring bike, I was starting to feel unstable and feel like, okay, I gotta really rein this back in. So, the three factors to me are, is most of you riding flat? Then I think it doesn't matter as much, because the power of the brakes only really matter when you're going downhill as much. If they're decent enough brakes, then it doesn't matter so much if it's more flat. I'd say the wider tires and the more slack geometry of the more modern style all-road / gravel bikes are going to be an improvement for someone who has a lot of fear going downhill, and you're not a daredevil and you're not looking to go super duper fast on your bike. Don't get it twisted, the Triton can go really fast, but there are things that feel more stable when you're at high speeds. I mean, raw speed doesn't really matter if you feel like you don't have as much control. So, there you have it. Get in the comment section what you think about modern bikes. Some people think a lot of these improvements are gimmicks and it doesn't matter. I would say I'm always open to try new things. Obviously, technological advancements should make the bike better, but sometimes it is just marketing, and it's like, you definitely, those of us who stay in touch with the biking industry, sometimes a lot of innovations are for the sake of innovations. Like, does anyone really need a 2x12 bike, 2x12 speed, 24 speed in that way? Some people might say they do, but if you're not competitive and you're just trying to get around town and have fun, do you really need that? Do you really need a 14 speed or 13 speed cassette in the back? Probably not. I'd say probably after 9 speeds, doesn't matter that much. You're not going to get that much of an advantage if you're not an athlete in search of marginal gains. It really doesn't matter. So I'm interested to hear people's opinion on this, their opinions on the old school style bikes versus the new. Would you get a new bike? Do you feel like you'd need to? And what would be the reason to? And what would be the reason not to? All right, thank you so much. I'll talk soon.